for the folks who are watching, and let me read this here. My man Cleo is on our YouTube channel, and he tweeted this. Let me find his tweet. He said, "Quote: They are not hypocrites. They are consistent and focused on a clear agenda."
Right. It's true.
The right has always understood how critically important Supreme Court is.
Yes.
Which is why the more majority came to power in the late 1970s, 1980s with Ronald Reagan. They understood that. For the people, again, who are at home, this is why also y'all got to learn y'all got to read. Here we go to my iPad. This is a book by Jack Bass. It is called Unlikely Heroes, a vivid account of the implementation of the Brown decision in the South by Southern federal judges committed to the rule of law.
Yes.
Now, everybody who's watching, let me just unpack this, and then I want y'all to respond. What you have to understand is that there were two Brown decisions. There was Brown 1 and Brown 2. Second, the Supreme Court said all deliberate speed, which actually meant slow as hell. They actually left it up to the lower courts to actually implement Brown versus Board of Education. Many of the legal procedures we have now, such as injunction, did not exist prior to Brown. That was literal law that was created by these federal judges. The Fifth Circuit, which covered Alabama, covered Texas, covered Mississippi, these were white Southern judges. White folks thought that these white men were going to uphold racism. In fact, they didn't. They upheld the law. They were ostracized, kicked out of country clubs and others.
Run out of time.
And the judge said, fine, to one of the wives. She's like, what are we going to do? He said, we're just going to be by ourselves, because he understood the rule of law. If you don't understand all these conservative think tanks, I need you to understand that conservative think tanks came out of the Black Freedom Movement. As a result of Brown 1, Brown 2, then those legal decisions, everything began to change. Now, some of you may begin to say, well, Roland, I don't understand, because I can recall folks like William F. Buckley, how Republicans were all about supporting civil rights. You're absolutely right. Until this book came out. Here we go to my iPad. Conscience of a Conservative by Barry Goldwater.
That's right.
It is this book, Barry Goldwater, opposing the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that completely flipped Republicans, who then became the biggest critics of civil rights. Who did they hate the most? The courts. Because what Thurgood Marshall, what those lawyers with NAACP Legal Defense Fund understood is that the federal law is the law. So when you hear conservatives today talk about activist judges, they're actually talking about the judges who implemented Brown versus Board of Education, the judges who implemented civil rights law. They're talking about the late Damon Keith. They're talking about Constance Baker Motley. They're talking about Leon Higginbotham. They're talking about Thurgood Marshall.
That's right.
And so, to understand what's happening now, and the reason the Heritage Foundation, which is not far from here, even though it's led by a black woman, Kate James, and Kate Cole James is great, all of these institutions were born out of white power being torn down because of civil rights laws. These foundations, all of a sudden, Cato Institute, Heritage, and others, the Mellon family out of Pittsburgh, funded by millions of dollars these right-wing institutions. Fairless Society was specifically created to take young, white, legal minds, largely white men, train them into their thinking, move them through Yale, Harvard, Columbia, Cornell, Princeton, and flood the system. Reagan comes in 1980, appoints all these conservative judges. They then bring them into the system, appoint them as clerks. So, to Janice's point, when Kennedy retires, he waits in time for his law clerk, Kavanaugh, to be appointed to take his place.
Who went to the same prep school as Gorsuch. These guys
Oh, come on.
So what we are dealing with, folks,
Oligarchy.
is a system that came into existence 50 plus years ago. So what we're seeing today is the manifestation of a very clear, well-funded agenda, because they said we are not going to allow what those damn judges did for those black folks in the Black Freedom Movement. We are not going to allow that unfettered access ever again.
Absolutely, and the way that you laid that out, that is a mature adult situation. So the reactionary that's coming out.
You ain't gonna get that on MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News, but go ahead.
At all, which is why it's important to support Roland Unfiltered.
That's right.
Because black media definitely matters. So this is a full matured adult. So the reactionary action that we're seeing coming out of the Democratic Party of people that are alarmed or they're really upset, what you're providing now, the education that you're providing, the reactionary needs to become, okay, so then what are we going to do to combat this? The yelling, the screaming, it's not going to help, because this is something that has been set and been in motion for several decades. So I think that it's critical even at this time that everybody look at what we're actually facing and then plan long-term actually battle.
And Mustafa, I have these battles with people. First of all, I've never in my life identified as a Democrat or Republican. Mm-hmm. But I do know how to pay attention. Mm-hmm. And when I have these people go, Roland, you out here telling people to vote Democrat, no, what I'm saying is vote your future, mm-hmm. which means you better decide mm-hmm. who is more likely to appoint people who are more like to think like me, because these federal judges will be determining whether it's a class action lawsuit or not. These federal judges will be determining whether or not we actually take over, like what took place in Texas when it came to a federal judge took over the Texas prison system. Yep. See, that's why all these people who are running around here who are hollering, yes, and I'm going to say this, Tangibles 2020, who are hollering ADOS, I need y'all to think a hell of a lot deeper, because to say, oh, even if we got to deal with Trump 4 more years, the president can only serve a maximum of 8 years, right. But they are appointing people who might be there 40 and 50 years. Mm-hmm. And what you need to understand watching is that current Supreme Court justices, when they are writing their rulings, literally are using cases even when they were in the dissent for more than 100 years ago. Right. So a judge who's appointed in 2019 could have the actual effect on a law in 2119, mm-hmm. and folks are acting like what's happening present day don't matter.
Yeah, I mean, as everybody has said, it's all about understanding the power that exists inside of your vote when you don't get engaged in the process, how it plays out for literally decades and decades. But here's the other part that plays into this. These same individuals, when I worked on Capitol Hill, they are the same folks who will also end up being chiefs of staff who help to frame what the laws are going to look like. And then the interpretation of those laws goes to the courts. So there's a 1-2 that's going on there. So we have got to understand this game. This is 3-dimensional chess that's going on, and we've got to get engaged in this process and help to actually sort of change things out.
And progressive and Democrats on this, Janice, do not take the courts as seriously as the right.
No, they don't. I would like to offer, though, just a smidgen of optimism.
Go ahead.
And it's from a point that you made, Roland, about the fact that a lot of this extreme right-wing so-called conservatism, I like to ask them what you conserving, but that conservatism really comes as a reaction to the freedom movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Sure. They went, you talk about with all deliberate speed, from 1954 when the decision came down, it was 1967, 68 before schools started to be desegregated in the South. Mm-hmm. It was called massive resistance. That's right. Massive resistance to what? Burgeoning Black Power movement that really started in the 1940s with African-American soldiers coming home from Europe saying, I ain't gonna be treated like no boy.
Precisely. Well, there were actual gun battles in train stations between black soldiers and white soldiers.
And so despite the fact that there's superior military resources, superior financial resources. We have been able to fight back and win against this juggernaut. And when we awaken unto ourselves, I predict that we will do that again.
So the folks, Greg, before I go to you, before I go to my next story. So for the folks who are watching, I need you to understand when you talked about how they're playing chess. If Republicans are able to get the Supreme Court to validate and rule constitutional gerrymandering, that means it will then go across the state. So it was ruled unconstitutional in Pennsylvania. The Wisconsin case went to the courts. They kicked it back. You got the one in North Carolina. You got the one district in Maryland. You got what's happening in Texas. You have it happening around the country. So here's what happens. If the Supreme Court, the conservative Supreme Court, says we're going to declare gerrymandering to be constitutional, that means every state where Republicans control the legislature and the governor's mansion, they're going to redraw the districts to guarantee they stay in power, which means your state might vote 60% Democrat, but the Republicans will still maintain the control of the seats because they redraw the seats. Now, why does that matter? Because if they gerrymander the legislature, which guarantees them a majority or a supermajority, that means they don't even talk to Democrats. That means they can pass any law they have, whatever they want to do, which now means that if they control the federal bench, then the law that they pass, when you get sued by the ACLU or Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law or LDF, then you got a conservative who's sitting there saying, no, I'm going to throw your lawsuit out. So what they are trying to do is literally lock up state legislature, governor's mansions, federal courts, and control of the Senate. Republicans weren't tripping on losing the House. No. They were fine losing the House. It's the Senate. Yep. That's why all y'all white boys who are running for president, go sit your ass down and go run for the U.S. Senate.
Run for Senate.
The fool who's running out of Montana, you're not going to be president, but he could be the senator from Montana. The guy in Colorado can be the senator in Colorado. If Democrats do not take over the Senate, you can't change the judges. That's right. And that's the game, Greg.